Morning, Cristo here on TalkTV, in for David Bull. About to look inside the newspapers. Alex Crowley, former Downing Street advisor to Boris Johnson, is here. You see, it all sort of fits in together, this programme, and that's why we're talking about Boris this morning. But before we talk to you, Alex, let's just run through some of the front pages you're all waking up to this morning. We start, as we always do, with the red tops, the Daily Star. Energy crisis to ruin Christmas. Yeah, morning everyone. This year I want a pony and a 50 kilowatt is off-peak Lecky bill, please, Santa. And that's what they are going for this morning. Meanwhile, The Sun, Hooters sponsor under 10 shooters. This is a diner chain famed for waitresses in skimpy outfits is sponsoring an under 10s football team, but apparently it's been blasted as inappropriate. Meanwhile, the Daily Mirror, Queen's new health blow, and this is regarding the mobility problems which are forcing Her Majesty to miss her favourite Highland Games, and we're going to hear a lot, I think, about the Queen's health over the forthcoming months, mobility problems that she seems to continually be having. Let's talk about the Eye. The Tories fear wrath of voters after Liz Truss coronation. 80% of the public, apparently, according to the Eye, think the government is failing to tackle the energy crisis. I think that that's probably a fair comment at the moment, but that's because it's been a conscious decision to leave it for the next Prime Minister. And I think if the next Prime Minister, whomever it might be, doesn't hit the ground running with that on day one, hour one, I think that it will be disaster for the Conservative Party. Meanwhile, the Daily Express, Tories put on war footing for snap election. Apparently strategists are tipping October the 5th so that Liz Truss can potentially have her own majority if indeed she is crowned as Prime Minister. Daily Mail, now end the party probe witch hunt. MPs apparently facing mounting pressure last night to halt the Partygate probe into Boris Johnson after a top QC called it unfair, fundamentally flawed. Lord Panic, this is, said the parliamentary inquiry would not be declared unlawful were it not protected from a challenge in the courts. He claimed the approach of the Commons Privileges Committee was wrong in principle. Alex, former advisor to Boris Johnson, who appointed Lord Panic?
Well, I think that was probably Boris, I would imagine.
Okay. Just saying. Okay. What should we do next? Do the Telegraph. Energy plan on day one for Truss. So they're saying that she is going to get across this. Liz Truss considering setting out her plans to tackle the energy crisis to ministers within 24 hours of taking office. Guardian. Police chief, Truss's crime proposals are meaningless. The police chief in charge of boosting crime fighting has criticised Liz Truss's law and order plans as unwise and meaningless, accusing her of chasing soundbite-friendly but unrealistic targets. Well, you've got to realise at the moment everything's soundbite-friendly because she's talking to about 100 Tory members in the Cotswolds rather than the country at the moment. The real meat on the bones will come once she's Prime Minister. Finally, the Times, Putin hits West with fresh gas shutdown, stepping up its energy war with Europe last night, indefinitely suspending the supply of gas through a key pipeline to the West, which is not going to be great for your prices. So, Alex Crowley, former Downing Street advisor, morning to you.
Good morning.
Where should we start? I mean, do we want to start with the Eye front page, just to go back to that, saying, look, you know, the voters are seeing the Tories as very unhelpful towards them at the moment, and then let's reflect on the Telegraph front page saying, actually, no, Liz Truss, if she's made Prime Minister, she's going to hit the ground running with help for energy bills. What say you?
Well, there's obviously, because of the leadership contest, there has been a gap where the government should have been in terms of both taking action and communicating with voters. That is somewhat unavoidable thanks to the political crisis caused by Boris's resignation.
Why couldn't... I know that constitutionally big decisions, once a resignation has taken place, are passed on to the next Prime Minister. But Boris has never been one for keeping to the rules, firstly.
No.
Why could he not have brought in an emergency set of measures which would have been for 6 weeks?
I think probably because the civil service wouldn't have let him. Boris had.
When has that ever stopped him before?
It's never stopped him before, except that one of the things that Boris has never been particularly strong on is actually getting a grip of the administrative machinery. That's partly one of the reasons why his premiership failed.
It's a lot of words to say lazy.
Lazy is a strong word, but it is certainly true that he was never going to be the person that would sit there and get a grip of the minutiae of governing. That was never going to be his strong point, and as we have seen, that's
kind of the job.
You would have thought so. You would have thought so, but to be fair, the people that put him into office knew full well that was going to be the problem with him. They hoped that his other strengths, his ability to inspire, etc., would have made up for that, and he would have had people around him who could have dealt with that.
Why didn't he then... The problem I've always said about Boris was... Because actually, in a weird way, even though I'm not a fan of Boris, I never have been since he was Mayor of London, because of the reasons why many people see him as dishonest and duplicitous, dishonourable, all of those things. But why didn't he get it together when he was Prime Minister? Why didn't he say, right, yes, you're right, traditionally I'm not across the detail, but actually I'm going to try to be, because this is the biggest job, it's the job I've worked 40 years to get to. Now is the time that maybe I have to do some of that boring stuff.
It's a good question. I mean, I remember this time, the weekend before, Boris was about to win the leadership contest in 2019 and was about to walk into Downing Street. And I was part of the team, and it was very, very shocking to me that there had been no real discussions about transition. There had been no real discussions about policy, about things he actually wanted to do, despite the attempts of many people to get him to focus. And it was that weekend before, actually, that he panicked and called Dominic Cummings and set that whole train into motion. And we saw where that took him and the country. And yes, you would have thought that he would have really kind of steeled himself to do it. And there were moments when he did. There were moments. I'm thinking during some of the COVID crisis, Ukraine, for example, but there weren't enough of those moments to sustain him ultimately in the job.
And I think that was his downfall, in as much as he didn't have an ideology. I've still no idea what he believes in whatsoever, and I think that everything comes from that. Everything comes from that. Yep. Every single thing, even when you're in a crisis, if you have an ideological framework to work from, if your ideological framework is freedom, even the crisis where your freedoms might be taken away, you're working towards restoring freedom again. If you don't have one, you're chasing your tail. Yeah. And, in a way, it's a shame, because I think it is a real missed opportunity. But coming up, we'll talk whether he's going to come back. We'll talk as well about the eco-mob storming the Commons. Yeah, great. All of that here on TalkTV.